At 4:47 on the morning of May 11, 1945, Private John McKinney lay inside his tent near Dingalan Bay on Luzon, unaware that roughly 100 Japanese soldiers were slipping through the jungle toward his position. He was 24 years old, had spent 2.5 years in the army, and was the son of a Georgia sharecropper with only a third-grade education. By May 1945, the campaign in the Philippines had already cost the United States more than 60,000 casualties. Japanese forces on Luzon refused to give up. They carried out night assaults, raids at dawn, and suicide charges against American perimeters. Company of the 123rd Infantry Regiment, 33rd Infantry Division, had set up an outpost near Dingalan Bay in Tayabas Province. The position protected a vital supply route. 3 Americans operated a light machine gun along the perimeter. McKinney had just completed a long shift at that gun. He walked a few steps to his tent and lay down with his M1 rifle beside him. The jungle was silent. The Japanese knew the outpost was there. They had observed it for days, counting the Americans, timing the guard changes, and preparing their attack. The assault force advanced through the darkness. More than 100 soldiers from the remnants of Japanese units still fighting on Luzon moved forward. They carried rifles, grenades, knee mortars, and swords. Their mission was clear: overrun the American position, kill everyone, seize the supplies. The leading element slipped past the outer guard post without being detected. Sergeant Fukutaro Mori commanded the advance group. His orders were to silently eliminate the first Americans. No gunfire was allowed, only swords and bayonets. By the time the main force struck, the perimeter would already be breached. Mori reached McKinney's tent. He could hear the American breathing inside. One swift blow would end this man's life before he could sound an alarm. McKinney had grown up hunting in the woods of Georgia. His father worked as a sharecropper in Screven County. The family had very little. John learned to shoot before he learned to read. By the time he was 12, he could hit a squirrel at 50 yards with a .22 rifle. He trapped rabbits and hunted deer. Fishing and hunting kept food on the table when the crops failed. He enlisted at Fort McPherson in November 1942. The Army realized he could barely read or write. They also realized he was one of the finest marksmen they had ever encountered. His qualification scores stood out. Drill sergeants noticed he moved through the woods differently from other soldiers, quieter and more alert. He had spent his entire life in places where a single mistake meant going hungry. The 33rd Infantry Division deployed to the Pacific in 1943. McKinney fought in New Guinea, endured the jungle, survived the Japanese, survived malaria and dysentery, and everything else the Pacific theater hurled at American soldiers. By May 1945, he was a veteran who kept to himself, did his duty, and never complained. His fellow soldiers knew 2 things about John McKinney. He was the best shot in the company, and he slept with his rifle. That rifle was about to save his life. At 4:51, Sergeant Mori flung open the tent flap. The sword swung down in a diagonal cut aimed at McKinney's neck. In the darkness, Mori misjudged the distance. The blade struck the side of McKinney's head instead. It sliced away part of his right ear. Blood splattered across the canvas of the tent. McKinney's eyes snapped open to blinding pain and the outline of a man standing above him with a raised sword. He had less than 1 second to react. Mori was already bringing the blade down for another strike. This one would not miss. McKinney's hand found his rifle in the darkness. He did not aim, he did not think. 24 years of survival instinct took control. He swung the M1 like a club. The rifle butt struck Mori beneath the chin with enough force to break bone. The Japanese sergeant reeled backward. McKinney swung again. The second blow crushed Mori's skull. Outside the tent, McKinney could hear them, footsteps, dozens of footsteps rushing through the camp. The main attack had begun. He was bleeding heavily from his ear. His head rang from the sword strike. And somewhere in the darkness, nearly 100 Japanese soldiers were coming to kill everyone he knew. McKinney grabbed his rifle and stepped out of the tent. What he saw chilled him to the core. The machine gun position was 30 yards from his tent. 3 Americans had been operating it when he went to rest. Now he saw flashes of gunfire in the darkness, heard screams, and the sharp crack of Arisaka rifles blending with the heavier reports of M1 Garands. Japanese soldiers were flooding through the perimeter from the northeast. They advanced in waves. The first wave had already reached the machine gun emplacement. McKinney could make out figures struggling in the darkness around the gun pit. His mind assessed the tactical situation within seconds. The machine gun was the key to the entire position. It controlled the main approach to the American camp. If the Japanese seized it and turned it around, they could sweep the entire perimeter with fire. Every American in company would be killed. McKinney ran toward the gun. The 2 soldiers who had taken over the machine gun were fighting desperately. Private James Hendricks had suffered a bayonet wound to the shoulder in the first moments of the attack. The third man, seeing Hendricks fall, made a decision. He grabbed his wounded comrade and dragged him toward the rear of the perimeter. It was the correct choice. Hendricks would have bled to death if left behind, but it left the machine gun unguarded. 10 Japanese infantrymen reached the emplacement before McKinney could arrive. They swarmed over the sandbag wall. One of them immediately tried to pivot the gun around. The others stood guard with rifles aimed outward, ready for any American counterattack. McKinney did not hesitate. He did not seek cover. He did not wait for reinforcements. He charged straight at 10 enemy soldiers who had just seized the most critical weapon in the outpost. The Japanese saw him advancing, a lone American bleeding from a head wound, rushing toward them in the darkness before dawn. 2 of them lifted their rifles. McKinney was quicker. He shot the first man at 15 yards. The report of the M1 echoed through the camp. He shot the second man at 10 yards. By the time he reached the sandbag wall, he had fired 4 shots. 4 Japanese soldiers lay on the ground. He vaulted into the emplacement. The space inside measured roughly 8 feet by 6 feet. 6 enemy soldiers were still alive inside that tight space. Some tried to swing their rifles toward him. Others reached for their bayonets. One was still struggling with the machine gun's turning mechanism. McKinney landed among them and continued firing at point-blank range. The M1 Garand carried 8 rounds in its internal magazine. He had already used 4. He fired the next 3 rounds into 3 more Japanese soldiers at distances measured in inches instead of yards. 1 round remained. The 8th man stood directly in front of him. His bayonet was raised to drive into McKinney's chest. McKinney fired his final round. The soldier fell. The bolt of the M1 Garand locked back on the empty magazine with its sharp metallic ping. 3 Japanese soldiers were still alive inside the gun pit. They had heard that sound. They understood what it meant. McKinney flipped his grip on the rifle before the empty clip had fully ejected. He swung the weapon like an axe. Wooden Stark struck the first soldier on the temple. The man dropped instantly. McKinney swung again. The second soldier tried to block the blow with his forearm. The rifle butt shattered bone and drove into his skull. The third soldier lunged forward with a bayonet. McKinney stepped aside and brought the rifle down across the back of the man's neck. The vertebrae cracked loud enough to hear. 10 Japanese soldiers had taken the machine gun. 30 seconds later, all 10 were dead. McKinney reached for the machine gun. His hands gripped the receiver. Something was wrong. During the fight, the weapon had been damaged. The bolt was stuck. The feed tray was bent. He pulled the charging handle twice. Nothing happened. The gun would not fire. The most critical weapon on the perimeter was now useless. McKinney lifted his head from the broken machine gun. Dawn was beginning to brighten the eastern sky, and in the gray light he saw them. More Japanese soldiers, many more. They were regrouping at the edge of the jungle, preparing for another assault. He held an M1 rifle with an empty magazine. He had just killed 10 men in close combat. His ear was still bleeding, and the main attack had not even fully begun. McKinney bent down and pulled a bandolier of ammunition from one of the dead Japanese soldiers. American .30 caliber rounds. The man had likely taken them during an earlier fight. McKinney loaded a fresh clip into his rifle. Somewhere in the darkness, a Japanese officer shouted commands. McKinney did not understand the words, but he recognized the tone. They were coming again. He settled into the gun pit among the bodies of the men he had just killed, rested his rifle across the sandbag wall, and waited. The second wave came out of the jungle 60 yards away. McKinney counted at least 20 soldiers in the front line with more behind them. They ran forward with rifles and fixed bayonets, screaming as they charged. McKinney placed his front sight on the lead soldier and squeezed the trigger. The M1 Garand was built for fast semi-automatic fire. A trained soldier could send 8 aimed shots downrange in under 10 seconds. McKinney was not simply a trained soldier. He was a hunter from Georgia who had been shooting since childhood. He was faster. The first Japanese soldier fell at 60 yards. McKinney shifted his aim. The second man dropped. Then the third. The M1 struck against his shoulder with every shot. Brass casings flew out to his right. He did not think about his actions. His body remembered thousands of hours in the Georgia woods. Lead the target, squeeze the trigger, find the next target, repeat. The clip flew out with a ping. McKinney drove in a fresh one from the bandolier. The charging wave had closed 20 yards while he reloaded. Now they were 40 yards away. He began firing again. The soldiers in the second wave had expected to find a captured machine gun. They had expected their comrades to be turning it against the sleeping Americans. Instead, they faced one man with a rifle cutting them down with steady precision. 8 rounds, reload, 8 rounds, reload. Some attackers reached within 15 yards of the gun pit before McKinney shot them down. Others tried to move left or right in search of cover. He tracked their movement and fired. A moving soldier was easier to hit than one standing still. McKinney had learned that while hunting deer. The second wave broke apart. The survivors ran back toward the jungle. McKinney counted the bodies in front of his position. 11 more, making 21 since the attack began. He did not pause to feel relief. Japanese officers were already reorganizing their men. He heard them shouting beyond the tree line. Then he heard something else. A hollow thump from deep in the jungle. Then another. Knee mortars. The first round exploded 10 yards to his left. Dirt and fragments sprayed into the gun pit. McKinney pressed himself against the sandbags. The second round landed closer. The third struck directly on the parapet and covered him with debris. The Japanese had learned from the first 2 waves that charging into his rifle fire would not work. They would weaken the position with mortars first, kill him, or force him to keep his head down, then send in infantry. McKinney understood the problem at once. If he remained in the gun pit, the mortars would eventually hit him. The gunners were adjusting their aim with each shot and getting closer. But if he moved, he would give up the only fortified spot in this section of the line. A grenade landed 3 feet from him. McKinney grabbed it and hurled it back over the sandbags. It exploded in the air. The blast knocked him sideways. His ears rang loudly. Blood from his severed ear had soaked through the makeshift bandage he pressed against it. Another mortar round slammed directly into the sandbags. Part of the wall collapsed. McKinney was now half exposed to the jungle. He made his choice. Staying meant death. He grabbed 2 bandoliers of ammunition from the bodies around him, slung them over his shoulder, and ran. The Japanese spotted him moving. Rifle fire cracked from the tree line. Bullets snapped past his head. McKinney sprinted 15 yards to a shallow dip in the ground. It was not a real foxhole, only a slight depression. He threw himself into it and rolled onto his back. Rounds struck the dirt inches from his face. He crawled to the edge of the depression. He found a position to fire from. The Japanese infantry advanced again. They believed he was fleeing. They believed he was retreating. 2 squads stepped out of the jungle at a quick walk, rifles ready, heading toward the abandoned gun pit. McKinney let them come within 30 yards, then he opened fire. The attackers had crowded together while crossing the open ground. That was a mistake. McKinney's first shot dropped the lead man. His second struck the soldier directly behind him. The group scattered, but there was no cover between the jungle and McKinney's new position. He shot them down as they ran. 8 rounds. Reload. The survivors reached the gun pit and found only bodies. Their comrades from the first wave. They had expected to find the American there. Instead, they found him firing at them from a completely different angle. 3 more fell before they could locate the flash of his rifle. McKinney shifted position again. He moved 10 yards to his right while the Japanese struggled to reorganize. He found another shallow depression and began firing from there. He was doing what he had learned in the Georgia woods. Never stay in one place. Never let your target guess where the next shot will come from. A deer that hears 1 gunshot will freeze. A deer that hears 2 shots from different spots will run in circles. The Japanese were running in circles. Morning light spread across the sky. McKinney had been fighting for 18 minutes. His ammunition was running low. His ear was still bleeding, and he could see movement in the jungle that showed the enemy gathering for another large assault. He needed more ammunition, and he knew where to get it. The dead Japanese soldiers around the gun pit carried ammunition, not only the .30 caliber rounds he had already taken. Some carried Arisaka rifles with full pouches. Others had grenades hanging from their belts. McKinney had to reach them. He waited for a pause in the mortar fire, counted to 3, then sprinted across the open ground toward the gun pit. Rifle fire burst from the tree line. McKinney ran in a zigzag. A bullet tugged at his sleeve. Another cracked past his ear. He dove the final 5 feet and landed among the bodies he had created 20 minutes earlier. The smell struck him at once, blood and burned powder and something else, the metallic scent of death. McKinney ignored it. He had slaughtered hogs on the farm and dressed deer in the Georgia heat. The smell of death was familiar. He moved quickly among the bodies, grabbing every bandolier and loose clip he could find. He discovered 4 American ammunition pouches on men who had likely taken them as trophies, 64 additional rounds. He stuffed the clips into his pockets and belt. A Japanese soldier suddenly appeared over the sandbag wall. He must have crawled forward while McKinney was gathering ammunition. The man's rifle was already rising. McKinney shot him through the chest at 2 feet. He grabbed the dead man's grenades, 3 of them, Japanese Type 97 fragmentation grenades. He had never thrown one before, but he had seen them used. He knew the method: pull the pin, strike the cap against something hard, count to 4, throw. Movement caught the corner of his eye. More soldiers were approaching from the left. McKinney armed a grenade, counted, and tossed it over the sandbags. The explosion was followed by screams. He armed the second grenade and threw it toward the tree line where rifle flashes were brightest. More screams followed. He was already out of the gun pit before the third grenade left his hand. Running again to another position, keep moving. The sky was bright enough now to see clearly. McKinney found a shell crater 15 yards from his previous position and dropped into it. The crater was 3 feet deep, enough cover to shield him from direct fire. He could see the entire approach from the jungle to the perimeter. Bodies lay scattered across the ground between his position and the trees. He counted quickly, 28, perhaps 30. Some were still moving, wounded men trying to crawl back toward their lines. McKinney let them go. A wounded soldier required 2 healthy men to carry him. Every casualty he caused multiplied the enemy's burden. The mortar fire stopped. McKinney understood the reason. The Japanese had lost sight of him. Their mortar crews could not adjust fire on a target they could not see. He estimated he had 15, perhaps 20 minutes before they moved observers into position again. He used the time to reload every empty clip he carried. His fingers moved without thought, press the rounds into the clip, feel the tension of the spring. 8 rounds per clip. He had gathered enough ammunition for about 10 reloads. 80 rounds against however many Japanese soldiers remained in that jungle. The attack had lasted 23 minutes. McKinney had killed or wounded at least 30 enemy soldiers, yet he knew the numbers were still against him. The Japanese had begun with roughly 100 men. Even if half were down, that left 50 and he was alone. Where was the rest of Company A? The answer was complex. The Japanese assault had struck several points along the perimeter at the same time. McKinney's position lay on the northeast flank. Other soldiers were fighting their own battles on the south and west sides of the camp. The company commander was attempting to form an organized defense, but in the darkness and confusion of a night attack, coordination was nearly impossible. McKinney did not know any of this. He only knew that no one had come to support him. No reinforcements, no supporting fire, just him, his rifle, and the bodies mounting in front of his position. The Japanese regrouped at the edge of the jungle. McKinney could see them through the trees, soldiers checking their weapons, non-commissioned officers moving among the ranks, and officers studying the American line with binoculars. They had expected to overrun this outpost in 5 minutes. Instead, they had lost nearly a third of their force to 1 man in 23 minutes and still had not broken through. The officer lowered his binoculars. McKinney saw him point toward a particular section of the perimeter, not the gun pit, not the craters where McKinney had been fighting. The officer indicated the supply tents, a new approach, a fresh line of attack meant to bypass the deadly ground McKinney had created. McKinney understood their intention at once. They planned to move around his flank and strike the camp from a direction he could not cover. From his current position, he could not stop them. He had a choice: remain in his crater where he had protection and clear lines of fire, or move to intercept an attack he might not reach in time. McKinney climbed out of the crater and ran toward the supply tents. The tents were 40 yards away. He covered the distance in 8 seconds. He threw himself behind a stack of ammunition crates just as the first Japanese soldiers stepped out of the jungle from the southern side. They had not expected him to be there. The lead group consisted of 12 soldiers moving in a tactical column. They were heading for a gap between 2 tents. If they passed through that opening, they would be inside the American perimeter with clear shots at soldiers defending other sections. McKinney opened fire from behind the crates. The first 3 men in the column fell before the others understood what was happening. The 4th and 5th tried to fire back, but they could not find him in the shadows between the tents. McKinney shot them both. The remaining 7 scattered. Some ran toward the jungle. Others dove for cover behind fallen logs and shallow depressions. McKinney aimed at those who went to ground. They were trapped, unable to advance or retreat without exposing themselves. He shifted his aim toward the tree line. More soldiers were emerging. The Japanese commander had committed his reserve force to the flanking assault. 20 more men, perhaps 25. They saw their comrades pinned down and hesitated at the jungle's edge. That hesitation proved fatal. McKinney fired into the clustered soldiers. 8 rounds, reload, 8 rounds. Bodies fell among the trees. The survivors withdrew into deeper cover. 26 minutes into the attack, McKinney had killed or wounded at least 35 enemy soldiers. The Japanese had attempted 3 separate methods: a direct assault on the machine gun, mortar fire followed by infantry, a flanking move toward the supply tents. All 3 had failed. The Japanese commander now faced a problem he had never encountered. His intelligence had suggested this outpost was held by a small American force with limited heavy weapons. Standard doctrine called for overwhelming night assaults against such positions. Speed and numbers were supposed to overcome any defensive advantage, but one man had shattered that plan. The commander did not realize it was only one man. His soldiers reported heavy fire from several positions. They had seen muzzle flashes from the gun pit, then from a depression 30 yards away, then from behind the supply crates. It looked as if the Americans had set up overlapping fields of fire with multiple riflemen covering one another. That conclusion was wrong, but it shaped Japanese tactics in the next phase of the fight. The mortar crews shifted their position to the southwest. They began dropping rounds onto the supply area. McKinney heard the first explosions and moved at once. He had learned that staying in one place invited mortar fire. Movement meant survival. He ran north along the inside of the perimeter and found a foxhole that had been left empty when its occupant moved south to reinforce the defense. He dropped into it. The hole was deeper than his earlier positions, 4 feet down with a firing step that allowed him to see over the edge. The Japanese infantry attacked again, this time from 2 directions at once. One group advanced from the south, another from the original northeastern approach. They were trying to split his attention and force him to choose which attack to stop. McKinney engaged both. He fired 4 rounds at the southern group and dropped 2 men. He swung his rifle to the northeast and fired 4 more rounds, dropping 2 more. The M1 pinged empty. He reloaded in under 3 seconds and fired again at the southern group. The attack stalled. Neither group could push through the intense rifle fire, yet neither group withdrew. They dropped to the ground and began firing back. Bullets cracked over McKinney's head. Rounds struck the dirt around the foxhole. He was now under fire from 2 directions. His ammunition was running low and the Japanese were adapting. They had realized the shots were coming from a single location. 1 rifleman, not a squad, not overlapping positions, just 1 man moving fast and shooting accurately. That realization changed everything. The Japanese stopped charging in waves. They began advancing 1 man at a time. 1 soldier would move while others provided covering fire. Then another would move, leapfrogging forward and closing the distance yard by yard. It was a tactic meant to overwhelm a lone defender. Even the finest marksman could not track multiple targets moving at different times from different directions. Eventually someone would get close enough. McKinney understood their method. He had hunted animals that used similar patterns. A pack of coyotes would spread out and approach prey from several angles. The prey could watch only 1 threat at a time. The others would creep closer. Now he was the prey. 31 minutes had passed. The Japanese had closed to within 20 yards on the southern side and 15 yards on the northeast. McKinney had fewer than 30 rounds left. The foxhole that had protected him was about to become his grave. He did not wait for them to reach him. He burst out of the foxhole and charged straight at the nearest group of Japanese soldiers. 5 men were crouched behind a fallen palm tree 15 yards to the northeast. They had been waiting for their comrades to close from the other side. They did not expect their target to attack them. McKinney shot the first man while still running. He shot the second as he reached the log. The third soldier rose to meet him with a bayonet thrust. McKinney stepped aside and slammed the butt of his rifle into the man's face. Bone cracked. The soldier fell. The 4th man swung his rifle like a club. McKinney ducked beneath the strike and drove the steel butt plate of his M1 into the soldier's throat. The 5th man tried to run. McKinney shot him in the back at 3 yards. He kept moving. Stopping meant death. The southern group had seen him leave the foxhole. They were sprinting toward him. McKinney turned and fired. 2 men fell. The others kept coming. He fired again. Another man dropped. The M1 pinged empty. 3 Japanese soldiers reached him before he could reload. The first tackled him around the waist. McKinney hit the ground hard. His rifle flew from his hands. The second soldier stomped on his wounded ear. Pain exploded through his head. The third raised his bayonet for a killing thrust. McKinney grabbed the ankle of the man standing over him and twisted. The soldier lost balance and fell. McKinney rolled, throwing off the man who had tackled him. The bayonet thrust missed his chest by inches and drove into the dirt. He scrambled to his knees, found his rifle and swung it in a wide arc that struck 1 soldier across the temple. The man collapsed. McKinney reversed the swing and drove the butt plate into another soldier's ribs. He felt bones give under the blow. The 3rd soldier pulled his bayonet from the ground and lunged. McKinney blocked the thrust with his rifle barrel. The blade slid along the wood and steel, carving a groove in the stock. He stepped inside the man's reach and headbutted him. The soldier staggered. McKinney struck him twice more with the rifle butt. The man stopped moving. 33 minutes had passed since the attack began. McKinney was breathing heavily. His hands were slick with blood. Some of it was his. His ear was torn and crusted with dried blood. His uniform was ripped in many places. He carried bruises and cuts he did not remember receiving, but he was still alive. He looked over the battlefield. Bodies lay everywhere. Japanese soldiers who had come to kill Americans had found something they had not expected. More bodies than he could count in the gray morning light. Movement caught his eye to the right. 2 more soldiers were stepping out of the jungle. McKinney raised his rifle and realized it was empty. He had not reloaded after the close combat. The 2 soldiers saw him standing among their fallen comrades. They hesitated. McKinney charged them. He covered 10 yards before they reacted. The first soldier tried to lift his rifle, too slow. McKinney's rifle butt struck him under the chin. The second soldier turned to flee. McKinney caught him in 3 strides and clubbed him from behind. 34 minutes had passed. The mortar position. McKinney remembered seeing flashes from the southwest. The knee mortars had hammered his positions throughout the battle. Eliminating those crews would remove the indirect fire threat. He found a loaded rifle among the dead, an M1 with a full clip. He picked it up, dropped his damaged weapon, and began moving toward the mortar crews. The mortar teams saw him coming. 2 men were there. They had been adjusting their mortar for another mission. Now they scrambled to defend themselves. One reached for a rifle. The other tried to arm a grenade. McKinney shot them both from 45 yards. 35 minutes had passed. He stood in the morning light scanning the jungle for more movement. His chest rose and fell heavily. His vision blurred from exhaustion and blood loss. Every muscle in his body demanded rest. The jungle had gone quiet. No more soldiers stepped from the trees. No more mortar shells fell. No more rifle shots came from hidden positions. Only the groans of wounded men and the buzz of flies gathering on the dead. McKinney walked back toward the American perimeter. He was halfway there when he saw figures moving toward him. American uniforms. Soldiers from Company A who had finally fought their way to his section of the line. They stopped when they saw him covered in blood, holding a rifle that was not his own, surrounded by bodies. McKinney lowered his weapon. The reinforcements stared at the devastation around him. They looked at the shattered machine gun position. They looked at the scattered corpses stretching from the jungle to the perimeter. 36 minutes after Sergeant Fukutaro Mori cut open his tent, Private John McKinney was still standing, still breathing, still in complete control of the area. The fight was over, but no one yet understood what had truly happened. The soldiers who reached McKinney that morning belonged to 2nd Platoon. They had been fighting on the western edge of the perimeter when the attack began. It had taken them 36 minutes to break through to his position. What they found was beyond belief. Bodies lay across an area roughly 100 yards long and 60 yards wide. Japanese soldiers slumped over sandbags. Others lay crumpled in shell craters. Some were sprawled among the supply crates. Several were piled near the damaged machine gun emplacement. The platoon sergeant ordered a count. His men moved across the battlefield checking bodies and marking positions. The count took 20 minutes. When they finished, the sergeant did not trust the number. He ordered them to count again. 38 dead Japanese soldiers lay near the machine gun position. 2 more bodies were found near the mortar position 45 yards away. 40 confirmed kills in a space 1 man had defended for 36 minutes. The sergeant found McKinney sitting on an ammunition crate. The private pressed a blood-soaked bandage against what remained of his right ear. His uniform was torn and stained. The stock of his rifle was cracked from repeated blows against bone. He looked like a man who had walked through hell. The sergeant asked him what had happened. McKinney gave a short account: the tent, the sword, the machine gun, the waves of attackers. He spoke in brief sentences, no exaggeration, no drama, only facts. The sergeant did not believe him. No single soldier could kill 40 men in 36 minutes. It seemed impossible. There had to be other defenders, other riflemen supporting his position. Perhaps the private was confused from blood loss and combat strain. But the rest of Company A had been accounted for. The 2 men who had originally manned the machine gun with McKinney had been evacuated with wounds. Everyone else had been fighting elsewhere along the perimeter. The physical evidence supported McKinney's story. Spent M1 casings lay exactly where he said he had fired. The angles of the wounds on the Japanese bodies matched those positions. 1 man, 40 kills, 36 minutes. Company A's commander sent a report to battalion headquarters. The battalion forwarded it to the regiment. The regiment passed it to division. At each level, officers read the account and assumed it had been exaggerated. Combat reports often inflated enemy losses. Men under stress could miscount. The figures had to be wrong. The 33rd Infantry Division dispatched an intelligence team to verify the claim. They interviewed McKinney. They interviewed witnesses. They examined the battlefield. They counted the bodies again. Some accounts suggested that the true number of Japanese dead exceeded 100, but only 40 could be directly tied to McKinney's actions with certainty. The investigators reached a clear conclusion. The report was accurate. Private John McKinney had single-handedly repelled an assault by roughly 100 Japanese soldiers. He had killed 40 of them. He had saved his company from likely destruction. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor moved forward in June 1945. The Medal of Honor is the highest military award given by the United States government. Fewer than 3,500 have been presented since the Civil War. The standard is precise. The recipient must show extraordinary courage and bravery at great risk to his own life above and beyond the call of duty. McKinney's actions surpassed that standard by any fair measure. The recommendation advanced through official channels. Reviewers at the War Department studied the evidence. They reached the same conclusion as the division investigators. The story was true. Every detail was supported by testimony and physical proof. On January 23, 1946, Private John McKinney stood in the White House. President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. The citation described his actions in formal military language: extraordinary courage, unmatched bravery, single-handedly stopping an assault that threatened to destroy his company. McKinney did not give speeches. He did not seek attention. When reporters asked about the battle, he repeated the same brief explanation he had given that morning on Luzon. The tent, the sword, the machine gun, the waves of attackers. The press called him the Pacific's Audie Murphy. Murphy had earned his Medal of Honor for holding off German forces in France. McKinney had done something similar against Japanese forces in the Philippines. Both men had faced overwhelming odds. Both had refused to retreat. Both had prevailed through skill, courage, and something difficult to define. While Murphy became a film star after the war, McKinney returned home to Georgia. He was 25 years old. He carried a Medal of Honor, a third-grade education, and a partially severed ear that would never fully heal. The war was finished. The killing had ended. John McKinney now had to learn how to live as an ordinary man again. John McKinney returned to Screven County, Georgia in 1946. He went back to the only life he understood: farming, hunting, and fishing in the same creeks where he had first learned to shoot as a boy. He almost never spoke about the war. Neighbors knew he had earned the Medal of Honor. They had read the newspaper stories, but McKinney never mentioned it, never displayed the medal, never attended reunions or gave interviews. When people asked about Luzon, he would offer a few words and then change the subject. The nightmares were another matter. His family knew about those. The sounds he made in his sleep. The way he would wake suddenly, reaching for a rifle that was not there. The war had followed him home in ways no medal could fix. Post-traumatic stress disorder was not a recognized diagnosis at that time. In 1946, soldiers who struggled with combat memories were told to forget it, move forward, and be grateful they had survived. McKinney did what many veterans of his generation did. He buried the memories and kept working. He married, raised a family, and worked different jobs around Screven County. The years passed. Korea came and went. Vietnam came and went. New wars produced new heroes and new veterans carrying their own hidden burdens. McKinney remained in Georgia, living quietly and growing older. The Medal of Honor rested in a drawer somewhere. He had received the nation's highest military award, and most of his neighbors did not even realize it. In 1965, author Forrest Bryant Johnson began researching McKinney's story. Johnson was a veteran himself. He understood what McKinney had endured. He spent years locating witnesses, reviewing military records, and reconstructing the details of those 36 minutes on Luzon. The research was challenging. McKinney did not want to speak about it. Many witnesses had already passed away. Military records were scattered across different archives, but Johnson continued. He believed the story needed to be told. His book, Phantom Warrior, was published in 2007. It described McKinney's childhood in Georgia, his service in the Pacific, and the battle that earned him the Medal of Honor. The book brought new attention to a hero most Americans had never heard about. McKinney did not live to see it published. He died on April 5, 1997 in Sylvania, Georgia. He was 76 years old. The sharecropper's son who had killed 40 Japanese soldiers with a rifle and his bare hands passed away quietly, surrounded by family. He was buried in Screven County, not far from the land where he had learned to hunt. 20 years after his death, Georgia honored him again. In 2017, the state legislature voted to rename a section of highway in Screven County. It became the John R. McKinney Medal of Honor Highway. A ceremony took place. Veterans attended. The McKinney family accepted the recognition on behalf of a man who had never sought attention for what he had done. The highway sign still stands today. Drivers pass it without knowing the story behind the name. They do not know about the tent and the sword. They do not know about the machine gun and the 36 minutes. They do not know that the quiet farmer who once lived nearby had saved an entire company through an act of courage and violence that still seems unbelievable. 40 men in 36 minutes. One rifle, one soldier. One morning in the Philippines that should have ended in massacre but ended in something entirely different. Private John McKinney never set out to become a hero. He was a farm boy who joined the army because there was a war. He did what he had to do to survive and to protect the men sleeping around him. Then he returned home and tried to live a normal life. That is the story, that is the legacy, that is John McKinney. If this story moved you the way it moved us, please press the like button. Every like helps this story reach more people. Press subscribe and turn on notifications. We are bringing forgotten stories back to life every day. Thank you for watching. Thank you for helping ensure that John McKinney is not forgotten. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.